Greetings, fellow songwriters and seekers, and welcome back to Muse and Measure. If you haven't done so yet, please take a moment, hit that little subscribe button down below. Okay, so melodies and working with melodic seeds. I did a video about this a couple weeks ago about capturing melodic seeds. I'll put a link to it down below in case you missed it. But in that video, I talked about how I was cleaning the house and this melody just popped in my head. And the old Ginsbergian saying, when the muse calls, answer, I recorded it. And I went something like this. La 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 da 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 da. La 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 la. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Now that melody just popped in my head and I sang it into my watch to capture it, but whenever this happens to me, I get a little bit nervous that maybe I accidentally ripped off the melody, that it's some old song, maybe from some Disney movie or some other musical piece that I just don't remember. And maybe you can recognize the tune. Maybe I accidentally ripped it off. So if that's the case, please let me know in the comments below. But I kind of don't want to know because I've already kind of developed it into a full-fledged song. And what I want to talk about today is what to do with a melody like that. First of all, how to find the chords for it. And then how to keep it interesting and how to keep it fresh, especially if you're going to use the melody over and over again. And this brings me to what's become one of my favorite forms, and it comes from the Baroque era. It's the Ritornello or Ritornello forms, which means to return. And how the form works is that you have like a main theme, we'll call it A, and then you go away from it, there's a B section, but then you come back to A again. Then you go to a C section, and you come back to A. Then you go to a D section, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's called the return, is because you're going to all these tangents, but you're always returning back to the A form. And I like this melody a lot, so I thought, well, I'm going to try to do that with this. And the reason I like the Ritornello form is because it's built in that you have repetition and variation. If you want to hear some classic examples of this, listen to The Four Seasons by Vivaldi. I'll put a link down below for that. There's also Bach pieces and Handel pieces that use this form as well. It was a very popular form for a long time. And this built-in variation repetition is very dear to my heart because I like a good balance between the two. I don't really like music that is too repetitive. I mean, I say that with a caveat, and I immediately want to qualify it because I'm sure there's plenty of examples that are very repetitive that I do actually like. So maybe I'd take that back. But it's something to be conscious of when you're composing, writing music, that you are aware of how much you're repeating and how much you're varying. I wrote a whole book, a short book on this with my friend Peter Price. I'll put a link to it down below. It's called Between Boredom and Ecstasy on Repetition in Music. On repetition and variation in music. And I go into all the different reasons why. I'm talking about getting to ecstatic states when listening to music, which I think we all want. That's why we listen to music, is to have this kind of transcendent moment, to forget about ourselves for one moment. And what's kind of built in the Ritornello form is this variation. But it also returns us back to something that we can grasp onto. And so that's what I kind of adopted for this form, and I've realized that I've done it for a lot of songs now. It's just, I really like a lot of variety, and this form allows for it. You get a lot of variety, but you also get that repetition, so there is some catchiness to it. But even so, the repetition as I wrote this song got a little samey. And I'll tell you why. So first of all, I picked the chords for the melody. First of all, you got to find out what key you're in. So I went, I tuned it out, So I figured out I was in the key of E flat. So I tried out a bunch of different chords, but I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I just tried to stick to the 4-5-1 chord progression. That's what I did. So I went 4, la, 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 5, la, la, 1, la, la, 4, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, and then to 6. Then I repeated that again. 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 1, 1, 1. Then I wanted a little variation there, so I went up outside the key and I went to F major, the 2, and then back to the 4, 4, la, la, 5, and then ended on the 6. So it started out really focusing on being an E flat major, and then at the end it kind of has a question mark there that, oh, is this actually in C minor, the relative minor to E flat major? So if you're new to music theory, maybe your head is spinning a little bit here, but every major key has a relative minor. It's usually the 6th note of the scale. I shouldn't say usually, it is the 6th note of the scale. Well, we'll get into that in a second. So as I was doing that and I was, developing the lyrics for this song, that chord progression just got a little bit samey, and it just kind of maybe for what I wanted to do and the emotions that I wanted to express, it was a little too folksy. Not that I don't love folk music. I'm a big fan of folk music. And I think that if you can express something simply with simple chords, meaning the standard chords 1, 4, 5, then you should do that. I don't believe in just adding fancy chords just for the sake of it, because sometimes that dilutes the emotion that you're going for. The simpler, the more direct, the better, I think. But as I was developing this melody, it dawned on me that I'm not really enjoying going back again and again and again to this folk form. So I thought I'd reharmonize it. And reharmonizing is just a fancy way of saying picking new chords for the same melody. So what I always start with is the chords that are within the key. So you've got to know this, and you can just look this up online. Whatever key you're in, you can see what's the 1 chord, the 2 chord, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's only 7 possible chords in the scale, and then there's all these outside chords that we'll get into in a second as well. But in the key of E flat, the 1 chord is E flat, the 2 chord is F minor, 3 chord is G minor, 4 is A flat, 5 is B flat, 6 is C minor, and the 7 is D diminished, and then you go back to 1, D flat. Okay? So I used those chords, and I tried out some melodies with it, and then I actually added some chords outside the key. In a previous video, I talked about this, what's called word painting or madrigalisms, and so whenever you hit on something that you want, something that's kind of outside, that kind of punches a little bit more, or accents, or even demonstrates the emotion that you're trying to express with the chord, then that's what's called word painting or madrigalisms. And so I did that a little bit. So I'll go through this form a little bit of this song, and you can just see what I did as far as reharmonizing, and then how I used outside chords, and then also how this form just works, how you return and go away, you return and go away. But I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted even more variation, so actually I switched up every time it returned, that the chord changes were slightly different, or at least a few times I did that. So it starts out like this. So instead of starting on the 4 chord, I decided to start on F minor. I go out walking free from your leash, still hearing the sound of the bell. Though I get lost, there isn't a cause I wouldn't pay to feel this free. So what I did there, I started with the 2 chord, 2, 3, 6, 4, and then I go outside the standard major key here. I go to D flat, which could be part of a E flat Mixolydian scale. And then I go to a G7th chord, back to E flat. So the G7th is like the 3rd chord, but it's been majored. The 3rd chord is naturally minor in E flat major, so I made it a G7th. So it's even a dominant 7th. So it's kind of an anticipation or a foreshadowing of what's about to happen. Because if you have a dominant chord with a 7, a major chord, and especially in a minor key, it really draws you back to the 1 chord. But I don't give that away right away. I go back to the 1. So what it's foreshadowing is that I'm going to end the verse with a C minor chord. So G7 is the 5, or the dominant, the dominant chord. And if you add a 7th, it's especially pulls back to the 1 in C minor. Okay, so it's a little foreshadowing. So let me just go through this again. So so the 2 chord, la la la, 3 chord, 6 chord, 4, flattened 7th, major 3rd, back to 1, and then back to major 3rd again. So there's like a tug of war between whether we're in major or minor, and then back to 4. A little bit more stability there. 4, 3, 1, and then outside the key with a major 2, and then 6, major 3rd, and then 6 again. Okay. So that's the A form that I'm going to return to again. Well, I'm going to return to that melody again and again, but I'm going to kind of mess with the stuff every time I return. So in the Ritornello form, you would then go to something new, which is what I did, and this is what I came up with. Fading embers still long for the air and the heat. Fall and winter, I'd say we were through. Okay, so that's my B section. And then with Ritornello form, you're going to go back to another A. And I just keep the chords the same way because you don't want to be too crazy and varied in a song. You want to establish some kind of world where there's some consistency before you destroy that world or deconstruct it. Okay, so I go back to the same chord progression I used for the first A, but it just has different lyrics. I found my place and adjusted my face so the smile could reach the child. It took him a while to earn a face so beguiled through his concepts right there on the floor. And then I actually stick with the melody again, but I'm going to go back to that original folk chord progression that I did, and then use a variation of the melody. So I'm going to basically have an altered A, or an A1 here. So it goes la 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 la. Once in your life to be real. Okay, so then there's a bit of repetition there because I'm basically doing 2 of the same melodies, even though the second melody is a variation of the first. And then, like Ritornello form demands, I am now going to come up with something different. I'm fading, feel knocked on the brain. I'm faded to fall for someone else's pain. But again, let it be, baby. Tears making my heart. Okay, so the temptation now would be to go back to the Ritornello form, but I wanted to violate and have a deceptive moment there, and then go to actually a repeat of the B section, but with new lyrics. Pollen withers with a thirst to be foxy for bees. Fall and winter can't beat back the bloom. And I think the song's going to end right there. So this is a way of taking your melodic ideas and breathing new, fresh material around them, so you can continue to use that returning melody, but to give it kind of a new life every time it comes around, to give it a slight variation. And that could be with reharmonizing the chords, or it can be with writing a slightly different variation on the melody, so that the melody has something new to say. And I think when I record this, I'm not going to just have one voice in that altered A section. I'm going to have a trumpet and a whole kind of choir of people singing lie, 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 lies, just like Paul Simon's The Boxer, and common to Jewish like ceremonial singing. The cantor usually gets the congregation to come back with the lie, 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 lies. So it's in that kind of tradition of bringing people in, and that's why it makes sense to have a choir singing it. Anyway, so these are some ways that you can reharmonize a melody. Also, maybe you have a melody that you just don't, it's not quite working. Well, maybe try some new chords with it, and try these 3 strategies where you either write brand new chords with it, or you slightly vary the melody, or you try this away and return. All right, so I'm curious to see how this goes for you. If you want to give it a try, please put your comments down below and let me know how it went. Well, I wish you the best of luck with your songwriting, your melody writing, and trying out all these possible ways of varying things so it keeps it interesting for yourself and for your audience. All right, see you next time.